Welcome all to today's town hall, our platform to talk about and see and get to know infrastructures of generosity towards the heliogenic civilization. And today we have Tibet here, who is weaving and building and is specifically building infrastructure in the digital space, but also in the physical social tech space. So, Tibet, without further ado, we will listen to you and share what you're working on, and then move over into a discussion conversation at a later point. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Thomas. Yeah, really happy to be here and weave with some more folks that are thinking about similar ideas. I think as Thomas was saying right before the recording, it's like we're all working on the same project under different language and different banners, and I feel that here. So I'll be using my own language to describe probably some very similar ideas and the specific puzzle pieces that I'm holding. So I'm gonna share my screen. And go through a few slides and then, open it up for conversation. So I'm mainly going to talk about HYLO today, which is kind of my main project right now. We call it a pro-social coordination platform. And you can see the definition of that word pro-social, which I'll talk a fair amount about today, which is really just behavior that is for the collective, it's cooperative behavior. And so we're really designing HYLO to promote, this kind of collective cooperative coordination. But before I dive too much into HYLO, I do want to just share a little bit about myself. I call myself a communitarian technologist. Have called myself that for many years. I've been kind of oriented around community, grew up in a lot of intentional community on the East Coast of the US, Western Massachusetts. And I've been also building software since I was about 8. Studied computer science, did a whole bunch of startups, actually really relevant to heliogenesis. I worked in the solar industry for about 7 years on a startup called One Block Off the Grid, which was creating a kind of online marketplace and supporting homeowners and going solar. And we built some of the first fully online solar system modeling tools. So you could do the whole sales process over the phone and the internet and design the system on your rooftop and using satellite photos and all of that. And we called it the Solar Coaster. It was quite a ride over 7 years in that industry, and got acquired a couple times and ended up as part of a huge corporation that basically ruined everything we had been building. And that was the last startup I did before I got to this point of realizing we needed to do things very differently from the traditional VC-backed kind of growth-oriented, exit-oriented model. And I had always, my whole life, been thinking about culture change and systems change, but ended up focusing on climate change as the most important thing that I thought I could be working on. And then through reading, for example, Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics and other books like that, came to realize that we weren't going to be able to solve climate change without massive shifts to our economic systems, and that wasn't going to happen without big shifts to our culture. And so started the Terran Collective about 7 years ago now with a couple close friends. It basically is just a container where I get to work with some really close friends and kind of bring our whole selves to our work together, experiment with different models of ownership and governance and collaboration and financial solidarity and all these things, and kind of protect the work that we want to be doing in the long run. And so a lot of that work has been digital tools, technology, because that's a lot of our background, but it's also been a lot of community building here. I'm out now in the Bay Area now. And we are really oriented towards bioregionalism as a philosophy now. This sort of way of thinking where that's like, how do we coordinate as humans that live in a shared landscape? It's really like local organizing, but in relationship with the ecology and the land that we live on. And that framing and that philosophy has felt like a really powerful way to think about our work and what we're trying to accomplish. And just, yeah, focus locally with the relationships that we have and the land that we can actually put our hands in the soil and do regenerative work and restorative work. And in the meantime, HYLO, again, is kind of our main job, or the work that is paying the bills, but is also the main project that we're putting a lot of hours into, that we're super excited about. And it's because we see that we need different kinds of digital tools than what exists today, to do the work that we're trying to do the kind of weaving and regeneration work. But I'll get into more of that in a moment. And then I'm also a steward of this Collaborative Technology Alliance, which I'll touch on a bit later as well. And that basically is just a way to try and work with other folks thinking about similar things on the technology front, and yeah, make sure that we're in collaboration, we're working on interoperability and working together. So, I think everyone here probably recognizes we're facing a meta crisis or a poly crisis. There's massive systemic and cultural shifts that need to happen. This is kind of the why of where we are right now. And just to mention briefly, Terran Collective, again, as a whole, like in terms of facing this meta crisis, we have articulated our vision in the past as trying to work towards all beings thriving. I think it's not really a possible vision. Of course, it's never going to be possible for all beings to be thriving at the same time, but it's sort of like a catchy way to orient towards a goal. Maybe we can create the scaffolding or the possibility that all beings could thrive. So that's one way we describe our vision, and our specific mission is around amplifying cooperation. And that's a lot about where HYLO comes in. And I mentioned bioregionalism as like one of the main framings that we use. And I'll get a little bit more into how that applies to our work in the digital space as well. So that brings me back to HYLO. HYLO is open source. It's not for profit. I mean, we actually have a for-profit entity and a non-profit entity, but we're kind of running it in a not-for-profit way. And it's really a group collaboration tool or a community platform. You could think of it as an alternative to a Facebook or a Mighty Networks or a Slack or anything like that. I'll get into more of the features and where we're at. But we're oriented towards supporting purpose-driven groups and kind of evolving our culture through the design of the platform. So instead of a profit-oriented, extractive, engagement-driven platform, how do we design digital tools that are the core metrics are around cooperation and pro-social behavior? And we think that is like a needed piece of the puzzle to come together as a species and work to heal our planet. One core piece of our theory of change that I wanted to mention is just that we know that technology is not neutral. A lot of, often we hear people who are building technology say, it's just a tool. How it's used is more of a cultural thing or a sociological phenomenon or psychological. But time and time again over the history of our civilization, we've seen how technology actually has a dramatic influence on where things go. Even going so far back as the plow enabling agriculture, and that being such a fundamental aspect of what has led to the civilization we have now. And again, the social platforms that we have now, we see causing so many problems in our society, from the spread of misinformation to polarization and mental health issues and all these things. You may have seen the movie The Social Dilemma. So how we design our technology is so key, and so we're trying to figure out how to do that to create these like cycles of a new culture that is more trustful and mutualistic, and all these words on the right hand side here. And at the core of that, we think is really just building deeper trust and relationship. Another maybe contrast of how we're building things to some other people out there that are thinking about coordination tools is, in the Web3 world and the sort of DAO world, which we worked in for a bit, working on DAO Stack for a couple of years, which was one of the first tool sets for decentralized autonomous organizations running on Ethereum. And there's a lot of amazing work happening in that space. But philosophically, we feel like this idea of trying to build trustless coordination doesn't really make sense to us. And we kind of keep seeing DAOs and places where they're trying to solve human governance problems through technology and believing that the algorithm can solve it all. It doesn't really work. And ultimately, it's about the humans and the social relationships and the amount of trust. And so that's really at the core of what we're building here. And we've already built a fair amount. We started to think about the different pieces here, building relationships through kind of being able to find each other, both geographically and connect in person through events, and find each other through the digital platform, through the member directory, building trust through asks and offers, which we already have in the platform, as well as kind of working on projects together. And then, as we sort of build up in trust, we get to these more interesting levels of coordination that we can do, from decision-making, financial kind of value flow, and financial solidarity. And those are the tools we're starting to get to work on next. Just to compare a little bit to other platforms, we have the foundation built of, very similar to like a Mighty Networks or a Facebook group or any of these other platforms. We do have some really unique aspects already built, including the fact that groups can be nested within each other in kind of infinite levels, creating the ability to have complex organizational structures, networks, alliances. We call it our holonic architecture. Holon being, this idea that everything is a whole in and of itself, but is embedded in many other wholes. And also you can cross-post to many groups at the same time and create these kind of shared nodes of conversation instead of having to like copy and paste to 20 different WhatsApps or Slacks or Facebook groups. And we have the place-based tools. And so we already have a geographic map with the ability to find each other and find things that are going on around you and do mutual aid and all of that. Yeah, just to drill in some of the differences here, really focus on trust, the sort of local contextual aspect of collaboration and connection, thinking about how to make it not addictive and not engagement oriented. Not being in another silo. We sometimes say it's not another silo, it's HYLO. And having it be open and free and not for profit. We're trying to make it broadly useful to lots of different folks, and we have all kinds of different folks already using the platform. But ultimately, we are oriented towards how do we support people that are doing really good work in the world. And so that's kind of the culture that is infused into the platform, and how we're thinking about, the long-term vision is about regeneration, biospheric regeneration. So I'll just touch on kind of where we're at right now. This is just an image of the platform. You can create posts and have conversations, and you can see there's the map, there's the nesting of groups, there's also topic-based chat rooms. People can have different roles and responsibilities within groups. And there's many different ways to use it, but it's a pretty familiar platform in many ways. This is just a quick image of what the map looks like. You can see some of our partners here, our users. Zebras Unite is an amazing organization promoting cooperative organizational structures. Planetary Health Alliance is an amazing network of kind of public health institutions like hospitals and universities that are working on climate change. Open Team is one of our core partners. They're an amazing network that is basically a network of farmers and technologists that are supporting farmers that are trying to move food producers off of proprietary systems into more open systems where they have much more ownership of their data. And HYLO is coming in as the kind of community platform for that network. And so we've built some like farmer specific tools for them. Salmon Nation is a bioregional network around the salmon run on the west coast of the US from the Bay Area up to Alaska. They ran a cool kind of funding local project thing on HYLO that went really well called the Edge Prize. I mentioned the Planetary Health Alliance. This is more like where we want to move towards, which is about kind of managing the commons together. And we're working on our governance tools now, which should be coming out very soon. It's very exciting. And then just to highlight that we're like building it for ourselves, like really the work that we have wanted to do as the Terran Collective in bringing together the bioregion, for the Bay Area bioregion and creating more health and thriving here, we've needed tools that we don't see existing. And so we're trying to build this for ourselves. So now let me talk a little bit more about the vision of like how we get from here to bioregional coordination and thriving. We use this word stewardship a lot, and we see the definition here of an ethic that embodies responsible planning and management of resources. And so it's really about care and respect and responsibility. And that's the kind of culture we're trying to promote through this platform and through our work. And so we think of this kind of stewardship toolkit is what we're trying to create. At the center of that is this idea of pro-social, and I'll get into a little bit more about that in a moment. On top of the like core foundation of communication and collaboration tools, we want to build in governance tools and really create spaces where there's a lot of sort of participatory democratic involvement and like self-governance happening. Trust graph is one of our sort of longer term interesting ideas of how people form networks and hand out roles and responsibilities and figure out who should be making different decisions in a more decentralized way. And then again, the sort of bioregional context and bioregional coordination. But it really starts with this idea of pro-social. And so we're working closely with the authors of a book called Pro-Social that I really recommend. That's based on the work of Elinor Ostrom, Nobel Prize winning economist who studied how certain groups could do, did a really good job of managing the commons well together. And so came out with these principles that the authors of this book, David Sloan Wilson and Paul Atkins, basically built on her work, brought in some modern evolutionary theory and behavioral science and practice around like how to help groups become more pro-social and adopt these principles more over time. So, the first principle is a group needs really clear shared identity and purpose to know what they're doing together and who should be a part of that group. And the next one is about equitable distribution of contribution and who's giving to the group and who's benefiting from the group. And there's fair and inclusive decision making. And so that leads into sort of the governance tools. So we're really trying to weave in all of these principles deeply into every aspect of how we design the platform. I mentioned that governance is kind of coming next, and we're just about to release our first version of proposals. So groups will be able to, within the platform itself, create proposals. They're pretty flexible. They can work with different kinds of decision-making processes like consent or consensus or just regular voting or kind of simple polls. We're also about to release a more sophisticated version of roles and responsibilities where the groups can really customize those and have roles with different responsibilities and different powers in the platform. And we're also working on our kind of collective moderation or community moderation process, which I can also touch on more. And then after the governance tools, we want to get into how can resources and value flow across the platform, and groups can make decisions about money flow and do crowdfunding and things like that. And so that kind of will bring us to this full stack of the basic communication tools and the ability to organize and get together and collaborate on projects together, make decisions together, and then steward resources together. Again, I mentioned trust graph. I'm not going to get too much into that now, and it's still just an idea that we've been thinking about for a while. But I think, imagining how we kind of grow trust over time and sort of exploring what it would look like to actually measure trust and use that to do interesting things. And it could create some really complex games and tricky dynamics, but we're just exploring this idea and thinking there's potentially a lot of power there. I did want to mention the community moderation, and also in general, moderation is kind of the hardest problem on the internet. One of the things that we are not trying to do is reinvent Twitter or the sort of massive public square where everyone is in one context together and it's impossible to moderate well. And there's people complaining about policing their voice, and then at the same time there's child porn, and it's just like really hard. And in the group context it's easier, and so we have agreements that groups can set up, and when the community moderation process, it will be around, you can already flag posts in HYLO, but adding the ability to flag like which agreement does this break, how does it break it, and how could the poster fix that, and different people being able to weigh in and give their opinions and use a sort of graduated response, which is another one of the core design principles of having content be semi-hidden and get more hidden as it's been, more people have weighed in and say, oh yeah, this is breaking an agreement, but then also have the ability to repair and have people, fix potentially what they did to break an agreement in the group. So thinking through how to do this well in a group context in a more decentralized way, it's more power with each other instead of power over. And then this, the hardest part I think will be figuring out how we do the bioregional coordination. This is kind of the longer term vision. Defining a bioregion, for example, is an almost impossible thing to do, and they're kind of overlapping and nested, but we want to help the people that are near each other get to know each other, build a relationship, and be able to do things like steward the water of their watershed and figure out how it should be used well, and explore, again, these more participatory models of governance. So that is something we're working on. We actually, sort of exciting news, we just got one of our first fully unrestricted grants from a foundation called the Novo Foundation. And it's a smaller grant for 1 year, but they want to be in long-term relationship. And the thing they're excited about is bioregional coordination. And so we are super excited to work with them and figure out what that looks like over the coming years. And that can ultimately, hopefully, lead us to have these kind of nested bioregions coordinating together at different levels and scales, and help us figure out this mycelial network of collaboration across the globe. One more piece on what we're building, we're also in deep relationship with Holochain. If you know them, they're basically trying to build a peer-to-peer app architecture that requires no servers. I mean, they have built this and it's starting to be used, and we're working with them closely, and figuring out how HYLO could eventually run on Holochain, and that would sort of make it even more free and less centralized. So that is a really interesting area of exploration as well. And I'll end with just like how we're building HYLO. It's actually a really cool story. Speaking of Holochain, HYLO was originally a VC-backed startup that was founded, actually I think it was more like 2014 or 15. They eventually ran out of money. They raised $3 million. They built up this platform, ran out of money, and ended up selling to Holochain, who just acquired the team and the code, but wasn't planning to maintain the platform. And through a series of really fortuitous conversations, they ended up gifting it to the Terran Collective. And so in 2020, we took over the platform and open sourced it fully and have been running it as a nonprofit ever since. And so it's this kind of story of liberation of a product, a platform, which is very cool. We're really passionate about building it in relationship with our stakeholders of all different kinds. We call it relationship-centered design. We definitely invite all of you to participate. I'll invite you all to our Building HYLO community on HYLO, where we talk about the process of building the platform. And we use sociocracy as our governance model. It's a model that we are really passionate about. We think it's a powerful way to do decentralized decision-making that is, not this kind of trustless, amorphous DAO model that involves tokens, but is really about relationships and consent, and small circles of close-knit people making decisions well together. We're part of this ecosystem. I mentioned some of our partners. Yeah, the Collaborative Technology Alliance, I'll briefly just say again that we're trying to figure out how HYLO can be interoperable with other existing platforms or folks thinking about similar things, but maybe working on it in a slightly different way. So if you're interested in that, let me know. And we're also, some of these slides are a little out of date in terms of the years and the numbers. We're definitely not going to achieve 350,000 active users this year, but hopefully 30,000. That's more reason. Right now we're at about 3,000 active users, and we're hoping to kind of go up monthly active users. We're hoping to move up about an order of magnitude this year, especially with this new grant funding. We do have a lot of ideas for sustainable revenue, including certain features that we could charge for. We do want the core platform to remain free and open to use, but people are paying us already for sort of priority support, helping them onboard their communities, even to help steward their communities. And we have a vision of creating a kind of network of community stewards that are trained in pro-social and sociocracy and things like that, mediation, and could come in and help communities on the platform. So that's it. Yeah. Obviously happy to take questions. If you want to get involved, I'll post a link to Building HYLO if you want to get involved there and just kind of follow along. We're actually just about to kick off a series of events that we're calling a kind of collabathon around, we got this grant funding. It's allowing us for the first time, because all of our funding so far has been some grants, but mostly partnerships with really cool organizations that want to use HYLO and support it. And so they will fund certain scopes of work with like specific features that they need or want for their organization, which has been great. It means we have, taken no investment since we've taken it over, but it's meant that there's some like core features and bugs that we've never been able to focus on, because there's never been a partner who's like, I want to just give you money to fix bugs and make the mobile app work better. But that's stuff that we know is like really core to getting to a next level of growth, is having a polished, slick mobile app that works better than our current one, and just some sort of foundational user experience stuff. So we're just kicking off this process of what we're calling a redesign. The design still looks the same as when we took it over in 2020, and so it's just a little bit of a moment to refresh and polish and fix things up. So I will stop sharing and pause there.
Thank you, Tibet, for sharing this with us. I want to open the questions with two questions I have. One, tying back to the very beginning of your presentation and something you said, which I liked very much, and I'd like to unpack a little, which was that Terran is a container that allows you to protect the work. Can you elaborate a little bit on that sensibility and on the actual mechanics of protecting the work? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I went through a bunch of cycles of different startups that either I founded or joined early on, and every single one ultimately failed. I mean, you could say that the solar company succeeded in that it exited. It was acquired multiple times, but every single one, like the work that we were trying to do, ended up not kind of coming to fruition in the world as much as we would have liked at the beginning, because either we ran out of money and had the pressure from investors to sell, or couldn't raise more money because we didn't have a business model that looked good for the market, or we were acquired and kind of corrupted, or kind of co-opted or shut down. So yeah, so that's the reason for it. In terms of the how we're trying to do that, we're still figuring that out. I mean, I wouldn't say we've long had visions of designing the perfect ownership and governance model, and we've never quite had the resources to do that. We still plan to. In fact, we just recently applied to our first NSF grant, National Science Foundation, had a really interesting grant called POSE, the Pathways to Open Source Ecosystems. And it's basically intended to help an open source software project evolve from a small project to a larger ecosystem. And we were going to use that money to grow the ecosystem of developers and folks working on HYLO, but also pay lawyers to help us set up our sort of governance structure better, ownership structure better. Unfortunately, we didn't. They actually wanted to give us a grant, but because of the political environment in the US right now, the NSF didn't get access to some of the money that they were supposed to, that they were promised by our government. And so they couldn't. It's really, really frustrating. But there's a lot of, some of the ideas we have thought about. So right now we have an LLC, and it's just it's just the Tyrant Collective LLC. We run via sociocracy and consent. So we only have a team of 6 right now. We're very close friends, and we work well together in a very consent-based way. And so you could say in that sense, we already are protecting our work, and that we're all super aligned in our values and our process and making consensual decisions as a collective. We also have a HYLO nonprofit that is fiscally sponsored by a cool organization called Empowerment Works, and would love to have our own nonprofit when we, again, have a little bit more resources and bandwidth to do that. And then we've explored ideas like a perpetual purpose trust as a way to put the sort of IP and vision of HYLO and other projects potentially into a trust. If you haven't explored it, it's this kind of idea that's gaining steam both in Europe and the US and other places, that it uses current legal structures of a trust to, but instead of like a person, a trust being for a person, you can basically have a trust be around a purpose. And so the purpose could be the purpose of HYLO, and then you have a trust committee that's whole goal is to protect the purpose of the trust in the long term. And so they're outside of this, the staff or the executive team. So that's an idea we've thought about. The other thing that we want in the long term is to kind of exit to community and figure out how to ultimately have a more cooperative ownership structure, whether that's actually having a co-op or some sort of DAO-like structure that is, thoughtfully done and doesn't relate to money in any way. Not totally sure yet. I mean, there's various people exploring how to do this, and we're thinking about it a lot, but we'll see.
Oh, okay. So protecting in a way means to keep the space free from dynamics that might end up in perverse landscape, perverse incentive landscapes, right? So that's you keep money out of the picture and things, and that's basically leads to my other question, which is that in a group of 6 friends that know each other, it's pretty easy to regulate each other in case you tap into the darker parts of your dark triad personality. And in the larger group gets, the more difficult that becomes, and the more hijackable by some dark triad personality type individual the whole thing becomes. And before we organize civilization the way we do right now, we used to go just hunting with these people, and then they would not return from the hunt for some reason. And so we don't do this anymore, but we need to figure out new ways to downregulate the dark triad types in communities and at all scales. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts around this, because it must be a part of the at least thinking that you've done around trust. I would guess.
Yeah. Interesting question. Let's see. I mean, on a collective, on the level of the Terran collective, I think there's a lot of little practices that we have woven in terms of, always checking in at the beginning of meetings, um, taking time to kind of meditate together or do little exercises together, gathering in different ways in person. We're not all, unfortunately, in the Bay Area anymore. We've sort of spread out a little bit, but coming together and gathering and having retreats and just, yeah, there's sort of, I would say also an aspect of going slow, like caring for each other. Some of the people have children on the team, and just like, how do we create a culture of real, like, a community of care alongside the like community of practice that is working together. Some of that includes really interesting experiments in financial solidarity and caring for each other's needs and how we kind of distribute resources in the team, things like that. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of like regulating the like behavior of a group on a larger scale, and as we grow, I mean, again, the like pro-social aspect is really important there. It's like, can we nail every single one of these principles, starting with the clear shared identity and purpose, equitable distribution of contribution and benefits, making sure that there isn't, power dynamics where one person is just in charge forever and has all the power, and things are rotating and there's different cycles and rhythms of that, and distribution of power and rights and responsibilities to the edges, making sure that people feel involved in decision making as much, at least, as they want to be, but it feels fair. Having a kind of transparency is actually a big piece of it all. That's pro-social design principle 4, is around monitoring and transparency of what's happening in the organization and making sure everybody knows, and there aren't weird back channels and gossip and lack of understanding of the financials, or different things like that can cause a lot of issues. And then the graduated response to good and bad behavior, and not immediately kicking someone out of a group when they do one thing wrong, but having processes for repair and for conflict resolution. And then actually the 6th design principle is around conflict resolution processes, making sure you have that in place and you want to know how to do that well. One of the tools that we use in Terran a fair amount is the way of counsel, which is a circle practice that I've trained in a bit. Very simple, sort of synthesized. There's a book about it. This woman, Gigi Coyle, I forget the other author, wrote it in the 80s, and they kind of synthesized circle practices from a lot of indigenous communities and other places around the world. But it's a way to sit in circle together and just share from the heart and listen from the heart and make visible what needs to be shared in community and hear it and hold it. That's been really valuable to us when there's like stuff that's under the surface that needs to be present, brought forth. And so we are in the process of like writing. We have a stewardship guide for HYLO communities that I can share, but we're also in the process of putting together a curriculum that we think people can, could help communities steward in more pro-social ways. And that is one of the other core things, is that communities need stewards. I think there is often an idea that someone is like, oh, I'm going to create a community around this thing. and they kind of create the community and hope it just works, and just people just start being in community together. And really, you need to have some smaller core group of people who are committed to kind of stoking the fires of the community and keeping the energy moving and noticing when there's conflict. And so we really are passionate about the fact that communities need to have stewards, and ideally pay stewards. Actually, it's something that is not really done enough in our world. It's kind of like care work is not supported enough. Like mothers are not supported enough. Well, the community weavers and the community stewards are also not supported enough because it's not seen as like work in the same way, the tenders of the space. So we have a few people in our team that are being paid by some of our partners to help steward their communities, with the idea that we would eventually like pass it off to other folks. And we're working on curriculum for that. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that somewhat answers your question. There's a lot of different things in there.
Yes, absolutely. So it tells me that you are living various protocols and principles that within Terran that help you regulate your little own community. And I get the sense that there is a spillover into the technology that might actually help other people to do that same thing. Before I open to everybody else here in the room, I just want to highlight that there's a nice message from Nancy here for you in the chat, saying that she's really grateful for your work and is impressed by your thinking and work, because she's been dreaming of a tool like that for the last 10 years. So with that, who else would like to share a thought or pose a question? Donna, was that a hand?
Sure, always happy to jump in. First of all, it's pretty clear why Thomas invited you here today. Absolutely, so many different threads. I have had firsthand experience of being on the HYLO platform, and also in the last year. So I have that a little bit as a backdrop. But again, just as Thomas has conveyed, really appreciate the balance around the technology side and the human community and all the various aspects of that. So, I mean, a lot of work that's been done there. And I'm speaking as someone who's not techie at all. So as a non-techie person, one of the things that I've been wrestling with over the last few years does have to do with some of the collaboration and interoperability across various platforms, because there's all kinds of software out there. And I really appreciate the values base that you're coming from. So that's one thing. The trust, I think, is a biggie in terms of we could go deep on the subject of trust, and that would probably be the one subject I'd be keen to drill even more deeply down into. What Thomas described as the dark triad, the shadow, there's different ways of describing that. Our shorthand for that is a hashtag that I've been using a lot called messy humanness. And at the end of the day, we are all, folks, messy humans. Doesn't matter how evolved and how good our processes and tools are. Yeah, it's just part of the existential reality of being a messy, a human being. And so one of the things that I'm familiar with a lot of things you're talking about, pro-social, Eleanor Ostrom's, like all of the ingredients that you've described, wonderful. We're there. I think probably most of us here on this call are like we're there. What I wrestle with, and I think there's much work left to be done that hasn't quite been figured out, quelle surprise, no big surprise there, has to do with some of the structures, the enabling structures that not in and of themselves are any kind of panacea or the answer, but that will help to set more context. even more context for the kind of behavior that we're all working so hard to nurture and sustain, because that's also the biggie, is sustaining it over time and with larger and larger, groups of nested ecosystems in our world. So it's the fragility that I'm speaking to, because I think we've all seen the breakdown of things that have started up with great start, great folks, good hearts, smart, evolved, and then still how things can so easily unravel. So I know I'm speaking to things we've all had experience with, but that's at the heart of the work I would love to be doing more with people, without sort of saying, oh, we've got it. We've got the end. We've got it. Here it is. It's all here. We've thought of everything. Because there's lots of groups that have been thinking of everything. And I, by the way, I've sent out an invitation to connect on LinkedIn too. We have a lot of overlaps in there. And I've already gone on for too long. I'm the end person that never feels like I'm finished, because there's so many of these thoughts going through my mind. So I'm going to stop there and just, if people are interested in drilling down more on the trust, I'll almost stop there. When I talk about structures, some of where that's coming from is a lot of years, like over 30 in organization, behavior and design work, and some of it pretty, with some pretty hard, some rigor around form follows function and all that kind of stuff around structure. So I still think we need some structures, but permeable and adaptable and aligned with sociocracy. And so, Thomas, that I've been working a little bit with some people that have a certain form, and at the same time, where I am coming from is best described, new word for me, omnipartial. I am not out to promote anybody in the sense of saying this is the it, but rather much more fluid around ways that we can scale collaboration. So now I'm going to stop. Thanks.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, excited to connect more with you. And yeah, I don't know, there's a lot of pieces there. I don't know exactly what to respond to, but I will say that we also, we're not trying to say we have the answer either, and are very open to collaboration, to even, being like, oh, HYLO is not the platform that we should be devoting our time to. Here's another one that's further along that has a similar vision, or we could adopt that code base. So far, we haven't quite found anything else that's better fit and further along. And but there's lots of folks working on many of the pieces we're talking about. And there's of course the tricky dance of, like, we want to collaborate, but then actually how does that happen, and what does that mean? And then personalities get involved, and egos get involved, and resources. And honestly, the hardest piece that we found, like in the Collaborative Technology Alliance, is nobody has the resources to do the collaboration. They'd have to kind of stay focused on their narrow piece, because that is what is currently supporting their lives. There hasn't been enough funding that has come online for the more cutting edge, radical projects. It's starting to, I see it happening more and more, but especially in the technology space, where it's so expensive to build software and takes a ton of time and resources. And the trust piece, yeah, that's a whole large ball of wax, but I want to make sure there's space for other people to jump in if they want to.
Cool. I was going to spare us the trust part, but that's definitely something I'd love to explore as well. But before we do that, Claudine, Tiffany, Nancy, Stefan. Claudine, please go.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. I also happen to be on HYLO, so and I'm actually in the pro-social business group. So with Paul Atkins and Robert Stiles, and it hasn't been very active lately. It was but it's still there. I've just, while you were talking, I've actually gone there to see what's happening. And that's exactly that's where my question goes. You said it earlier, sort of that it's very important not to make it addictive, which obviously I fully subscribe to. What I found, however, on the 3 groups I'm on, which were all just newly established groups, what didn't happen was this engagement that I'm used to happen on a Mighty Network or on other platforms. It was really strange that somehow there was sort of huge enthusiasm on Zoom calls, and then there was this decision made, we just go now on HYLO, and then nothing happened. And there I wonder if there is a fine line between not making it addictive and sort of, you know, sort of like fostering sufficient engagement that collaboration actually starts to happen. So there I would be very interested, and I'm also interested in exploring further the trust piece, and would just add to that question on fragility. One of the things I really like about pro-social is core design principle 1, and I think that is very often overlooked and not gone deep enough on shared identity and purpose. And when that's not clear at the beginning, then things are very likely to break down. That's my experience. But my main question is like this other thing about the engagement.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, that's, again, I think I mentioned we're shifting into this kind of redesign phase. And there clearly is an issue with HYLO and its current design around engagement and sort of ease of use in a certain way. And it's subtle things, but it's really important. And we have never been able to focus on it because, again, we haven't had the resources. So we're really excited for this next push over the second half of this year, because the things that we see that are needed to just be able to like get to sort of comparable to a Mighty Networks, or even we see like so many people now doing their community organizing just on WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, which is kind of ridiculous. But you know, there's many ways in which that is flawed, but it's so like simple and easy and fast and accessible. And so the main things that I see HYLO as needing and missing right now are a fast functional mobile app. It's just too like slow to get in and get to the place where you're posting and responding to comments, and there's bugs. And so it's like fixing the bugs, performance of the mobile app and the web app, and then the notifications and the ability to easily track what you have seen and not seen and make sure you're like catching up with everything. It's sort of these like basic core simple things that we have to nail to be able to compete with existing platforms. And we know we have to get there. And that's what the next 6 months are going to be about. And it is a fine line of like, yes, we don't want to be this addictive thing. I actually really hate being in like hundreds of WhatsApps and Signals and Telegrams, and it's impossible to keep up, and it's just noise at a certain point. So we want to do better than that. And, you know, in some ways, I think like a Slack or a Discord is a little bit easier to track, but they also can get pretty overwhelming and hard to find things that have been posted in the past. And these are hard problems, but we do need to up level in terms of just the ease of use and ability to track what you have seen or not. And I think that will get us to the sort of baseline level of, okay, you can use HYLO, the enthusiasm is not going to wane. We're going to be able to like retain the energy that of a group that comes onto the platform, because we have seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Claudine, or do
No. Great.
for now?
Great to hear that there's it's acknowledged and work done to be done. So maybe we can dive into the trust.
Yeah, or Tiffany, Stefan, Nancy, do you have anything you'd like to put in here?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think Claudine and Dana kind of both reflected a lot of thoughts that I was thinking about as well. So I think we're all kind of very much on the same page in this room, it seems here. I guess, thinking about how HYLO, attracts people and organizations and things, like what do you think draws people to like a digital space, and like how do you guys like try to draw the right things to this space as you're building this architecture? I would think that's a really important thing, is that you're getting these pieces right and in the right balance, and bringing these communities together. And then maybe like a second question, as there's so many people working across so many different communities, do you see HYLO as potentially being kind of almost like a project management or CRM kind of, have some capabilities in that aspect where like you really could achieve that functionality? To me, it seems like it has the most potential, in all the spaces to really, have some of that like sight of, Facebook, where you see things happening in other people's lives, and you don't want that addictive thing, but you get a little slice of that, and then you have, conversations happening on LinkedIn, and you have, all these different things that are happening in all these different spaces, I guess. How do you draw people into this space where like you can actually have, that connection and that trust and that feeling of intimacy, of knowing who these people are in a deeper way, but then also working on these important projects together and finding more use in a space like this?
Yeah. I mean, we have not been doing any marketing, and it's honestly because of what Claudine just brought up. Is like, we know the core platform is not quite good enough or where we want it to be. So we haven't been like telling everyone to come use it yet. It's still growing slowly through word of mouth, and I do presentations like this, and so we're starting to put the word out more. We actually only just in the last like, what was it, month or two, launched a new landing page for HYLO that really expresses our vision in a much more beautiful, better way. We kind of had the old landing page that we inherited. So we are just now, and again, I feel like by the end of this year, we're going to be really ready to start putting it out there more and say, hey, everyone come use HYLO instead of whatever you were planning to use, which is exciting. Been a long journey. And I do think that the landing page, by the way, if you're logged into HYLO, you'll have to like open up a private window to see it. It does draw a certain kind of people, right? I mean, it's a pretty clear vision or sort of energy and culture behind it. And so far, we've only really drawn really interesting, cool folks that are in the climate space or thinking about alternative organizing structures or things like that. We will, of course, and already I'm sure, I don't know everyone who's on the platform, but it's a general purpose platform. We're going to see all kinds of folks start to appear on it, and that will have us start to have to think about kind of moderation of the public space, because we do have the public stream and the group explorer as a way that people can kind of like find or groups to get involved with and connect with. So we'll immediately, as we start to grow, start to have to deal with that kind of moderation of that space a little bit more. And then the second piece of what you were talking about in terms of like, it's almost like more like the individual relationships. We're definitely thinking about that. I mean, we've been very group oriented, and again, not trying to compete with Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. We're much more like individual, person to person or creator to followers or things like that. That's a harder space to jump in and compete, especially now that there's Blue Sky and Mastodon and the Fediverse and a million of these ways to connect with individuals. But we do think that the context of the individual and their relationships is an important one. And so we are going to build that in some way at some point down the line. And that's sort of maybe where the trust graph comes in, where you're kind of tracking your individual relationships, what groups you're in with them, what you've worked on together, maybe even, some of these like interpersonal dynamics. How much do I trust this person in this field or in this way? there obviously can be different like skills and interests, like sort of the LinkedIn aspect of like finding people that you might have a skill you need or things like that. So we're thinking about this, but it's not sort of the short-term goals are still more around the group-oriented collaboration.
Tiffany, you have a follow-up on that, or do you feel content?
I feel content. That was a good answer.
I want to pull on what I just heard and what I just think is here in the space, and maybe build a little bridge into what you just started, Tibet, around the trust and the weaving of group elements. And we're going to ground it in something I learned from Tyson Juncker Porta. We had a conversation around the question of what does it take? So it was an imaginary conversation around the question: if you were to build a community from scratch somewhere in the outback, what would be the things you would take with you from the current modality of civilization, and what would be new things? And obviously, from Tyson's background, he didn't have to take anything from the weird way we do things, but he could ground it immediately in his 60,000 years of songline culture that he's based in. And what emerged in his description was that any community has to fulfill various aspects. There are several responsibilities that need to be fulfilled, so that whatever that community does, even if it is life and maintaining a part of a bioregion, and that's it, no great innovations, no building of business, just being. There are responsibilities, and there will be people drawn to certain parts of that. There will be somebody who feels more responsible for the water, somebody more responsible for growing things, somebody else more responsible for holding ritual in space and things like that. And then over time, clans emerge out of those responsibilities. And the on one layer, of course, there's a web between the individuals, but there's also a web between the clans who are responsible and interdependent of one another. And since the story, as I understand it, for you begins in Terran, in local, in a group that is actually not anymore, but used to be in the same physical location. I wonder whether that's an important part of the trust element, whether it's actually just a very thin layer that is required in a digital space. Because all of the things, or I think most of the things you said around how you as a group regulate, didn't require digital, right? And the question is, what's the probably a very thin layer of coordination that is helpful for a group in that modality? Yeah. So I just was just curious to hear what comes up for you there.
Yeah, I totally agree. We kind of think of it as like, what's the minimum viable scaffolding for coordination at different scales, and that's actually getting you off the platform and into the real world to collaborate and connect more and as much as possible. At different scales, different things are required, and of course, if you're not local, then the digital is much more important and necessary. But the more people you have, when you can't all get together in person and connect, then you do need a little bit more sophisticated digital tools, probably. And this is where some of the governance tools come in. And so One of the framings that we've been thinking about a lot as we move into this redesign phase is how do we support the evolution of groups, both just as they're naturally evolved to whatever they're meant to become, but also to become more pro-social over time. So many groups right now start on a WhatsApp or a Signal or a Telegram or a text thread, and that's great. That's fine for 3 people, 6 people, 10 people for a while. But then if it starts to build and grow momentum and there's more of a shared purpose and collaboration that needs to happen, and especially if more and more people join and there's 20, 30, 50, 100 people, then it's completely unusable at a certain point. So, you know, one of the pictures that we maybe, this is like a one likely possible path for this redesign, is we do have these topic-based chat rooms in HYLO, but they're not well used or understood, and they're a little bit buggy and slow. And so polishing up the sort of chat functionality, and then probably having that be the default view, like the general chat room be the default landing page for a group. So when you first start a HYLO group, just making that process even like a little bit easier and slicker, and making it easier to invite people maybe by phone number, like every other, you know, phone-based chat, and landing just in a chat room and having it feel like you're just landing in a WhatsApp or, you know, whatever. That's just like super fast and easy to open up, get in there, start chatting, start sharing things. But as the group grows, and still having all the other HYLO features there, like posts for longer, conversations that are meant to live over time, requests and offers, events, the map, all of that, but kind of bring those in as the group needs them and wants them, as the group grows, figuring out the right way to suggest, oh, you're creating, sounds like you're posting a request. Do you want to actually turn this into a formal request? And then, you know, having some sort of matching system that happens there, or we need to start organizing an event, like bringing that in and sort of bringing in the different sections and views as a group needs them and is evolving. So that's like one vision for, first of all, making it like faster and easier and slicker and more engaging to use right away. And as you're starting to use the platform, chat is kind of the way that most people are organizing most of their community right now. But then evolving as the group evolves and offering much more than what these chat platforms offer. Yeah, and but totally agree that like we're not trying to keep people on the tool and in the technology, and in fact, I think that's so detrimental to so many of us. All, you know, just being on a screen all the time, and certainly is not the best way to build relationship, especially locally. So we're going to do a bunch of experiments and explore and figure out how to find that line between useful and engaging and supportive, but not addictive, and not just using the technology for technology's sake.
Is there something coming up here that you would like to pose or ask for any of you here? Donna, you.
Oh, you know, the more we talk, there's more layers and things that start to percolate. One, what I'm hearing from HYLO as a platform is it's great, it exists, and so it's just not being optimized in all the potential ways that it can be used. And what I hear you describing is the potential to build in ways that things flow more, because one thing about living is it's a flowing, moving the experience of living. I mean, what we all are been talking about is the need for things that are more like adaptive living systems, including us humans that are all connected. And so a technology that increasingly supports that flow. And what we struggle with sometimes with platforms is the clunkiness and the lack of that flow as a catalyst for that. But it doesn't take the place of us humans doing the work or doing the, the relating or the job that's ours to do. And so I like what you described around minimum critical scaffolding or specifications. It still makes sense in a world that has become too reliant, as if technology is going to drive and make these things happen. We as humans have great potential to live into and learn how to be better humans in our full human capacity and our whole person and brains and stuff. So that struck me. And then I really appreciate what you were bringing up, Thomas, around Tyson's, references to Tyson and the clans. And in terms of this, it starts to move towards civilization, the design of civilization, which is an emergent thing, but towards more of a pluriverse that recognizes there's going to be a lot of variation. I mean, we want to somehow embrace variety and culture and not have any single, view of that, which will include different ways that people define what their pro-social purpose is. And, we're going to have it all, there'll continue to be parts of the world that are not particularly pro-social because we're not masters of the universe that can make it all happen. So at some level, it's an acknowledgement that it will be a pluriverse, and we do all that we can to nurture those things that we think are sacred and good, and that will help civilization and our living planet to thrive in synergy. I think that's kind of what we're looking to here. And so we look to where are the building blocks, and even the building blocks can morph and vary and change and shift. It's not as if they become the building blocks for everything, but we need the building blocks. We really do. And, as we look at the world that we're in, that's as messed up as it is, back to the trust, back to the question of having enough trust to get far enough with this stuff that the things that we're doing continue, even if they shift and change a bit, but that they continue to thrive. That's where I still feel there's great potential for work. Yeah, and I'll stop because now I'm rambling.
David, do you want to respond, or because you're muted right now? Is this something that comes up for you here? Because if not, I want to maybe build on that with a concrete thing. That's so. I think we're all familiar with Dunbar here, and I'm wondering what might happen, and might it be useful to be able to, from an individual perspective, maybe extract from my interactions, my 5, 35, 50, 150 on HYLO. So I can see who are my 5 people in this scope, in this project that I'm closest to. And then when doing that for everybody in that group, seeing whether there's actual relational health in terms of a density of interconnectedness within this group. Are there nodes that are somehow orphaned? And then use that as a tool for stewardship to understand, so where do we have accumulations, where do we have the supernodes, where do we have the orphans, and actually understand how can we balance all of this, and where do we have to do the weaving. And the question is, would you find something like that useful? Have you thought about something like that in the context of trust, maybe? I'd be very interested.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and that relates to the trust graph idea. And I love that. And I think we're excited, hopeful and excited that we get to the place where we get to do that kind of more really interesting, deep work. And we do need to polish the foundations more, as we've been talking about, and get to like sort of a next level of sort of growth, which we hope can happen over the next 6 to 9 months or so. Well, maybe the like redesign will happen over the next 6 months, and then it'll probably take another 6 months to start building some energy and momentum from there. But yes, really excited about that idea. And in general, like we have a number of folks in our community that are working on pro-social AI. Like imagine a sort of AI bot that is living within your HYLO community and paying attention to what's happening and can kind of summarize and synthesize and suggest ways that the group might move through different conversations or conflicts or tensions, or be doing that sort of like weaving work and automatically connecting people that should connect around a project. Like, yes, that can, I mean, I would say first and foremost is a role of a community steward, but also I think there is interesting place where AI can actually support there as well. And I use AI, and maybe it could just be algorithms that are doing that type of weaving that are not really AI, but of course that's the buzzword now. Some sort of intelligence that is supporting the community. Yeah, I love that. And I do, and as I mentioned earlier, I think that the like individual context, the sort of like community around each person is an interesting context. And even though we're really focused on purpose-oriented groups first, there's a lot that can happen that's sort of like from the perspective of this person, what are the relationships to build, what are the collaborations that are happening or could happen, how do we support each person on the platform in kind of finding their purpose, their ikigai, and activating that in the world better. And so that's recommending groups, that's helping do mutual aid and connecting needs and asks and skills, and there's a lot of stuff that can happen there.
It's specifically when you are looking into one of your last slides showed the network of networks, basically. That's where digital becomes inevitable, where you, instead of individuals interacting, you have communities interacting, and with all of their sensibilities and responsibilities and talents, skill sets that they can bring to the table. And that's where you move into what Donna was pointing towards, the actual civilization fabric weaving. And that's where I see the most important element of trying to bring that work that is could also be done offline into the digital, because that's where it starts unfolding its incredible value. At least how I read it.
Absolutely. No, go for it.
No, there's
Donna,
a couple
please.
of things coming up for me, which also have to do with understanding what the blockages are for collaboration, and what is creating in humans so much cognitive dissonance and incongruence. So some of what I'm raising now has to do with navigating through the times we're in now, using all the things that we've just talked about to help birth these healthier pro-social civilizations. And I'm going to plop this in here because just before I came into this meeting, there was an interesting conversation about double binds, which has been getting a lot more focus these days. And who hasn't experienced double binds? A huge one is around money, huge. So there's others, but it is a biggie for many people, even those that are trying to help bring about this healthy shift. This is really, really big. And it struck me in this conversation, I was about to comment and then I jumped in here, that we got more than double binds, folks. We got triple and quadruple binds at some level, in the sense of people need resources, they need to eat, they need to, you know, to keep the wheels on, whatever. And at the same time, they want to be doing good things, pro-social things. But we're seeing a lot of people, good people, doing not pro-social things, stuck in this rock between stuck between a rock and a hard place, having to make choices, decisions, right? Of, well, will I do this or will I do that? And I am seeing that kind of, those issues rising exponentially everywhere I'm going. They're manifesting in some different ways, but they're bringing out a shitload of messy humanness. And I'm bringing it up here because I think this is important for us all, not just to talk about, but to say, if this is some of the reality of that we're dealing with, how can we help navigate this? How can we, you know, kind of, at some level, being human is to be able to surface this and make it legitimate that we talk about this. So I was really glad to see this happening. This was with a climate psychologist most recently, around recognizing people doing work in organizations that they no longer value their work. They no longer value the purpose of the organization, but they're stuck. And the tragedy of the percentage of our human population that either don't have work, don't have resources, or doing work that they don't value, and they're not being valued. And this is some of the shift that we're trying to make. So again, I'm going to stop there, but I was really feeling energized coming into this meeting with that. I was kind of holding that. And I think this is still something that we're all, everywhere we're showing up, we're seeing this. And we're also seeing people who we love and want to support, getting caught in these traps. So, you know, we might call them the micro multipolar traps or something. I'll stop there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of heartbreaking so often to just see how hard it is to break out of our current structures and systems and try and do things differently. And I see this happening in so many different places in my life right now, different communities. Like the messy human aspect always comes up so hard as soon as we get into
to the commons. It does bring us back to, how do we reconstitute the commons at that, maybe it starts at that smaller Dunbar level that you're talking about, Thomas, but reconstitute it into the fabric of society with enough hard, I mean, that's where I don't have all the answers, but I've been, you know, who does? But it's the minimum critical specification, including some legal, you know, working with some legal stuff that is never the whole answer, but that helps when we hit the real bumps, to navigate those bumps and to come out the other side better, you know, reasonably better for it, instead of the kind of casualties that we're seeing so much. That's some of the question that I have. It can't all happen in the mycelium network, in this informal stuff. And tech isn't going to, like, tech is an enabler, absolutely, and can help and get better and less clunky. And us humans, we're going to keep being humans. I mean, it's like, that isn't going to stop. But that's where I wrestle with, we need some structure that sets a bit more context, and why I've liked the term systemic trust. And yes, I've gleaned that from Graham Boyd's work. And I'm not seeing Graham Boyd's work being the whole, I'm not saying anybody's got the whole answer. Okay, but that's why I'm like, I keep coming back to these things around, how do we get the balance, the reasonable balance, to be heading in the roughly right direction, in the roughly right ways. Check.
Just noting that I should jump off in a couple minutes because I have another HYLO call to prepare for. But on the commons has been such a core part of our worldview, and Karen Collective, when we started it, we hoped it would grow to maybe Dunbar's like 150 and be more sort of like an inspiral network of the Bay Area, and be able to do some really more interesting experiments with creating and stewarding common resources together and things like that. We never quite figured that out. We had some really great events. We actually were starting to build some momentum. We had our biggest event, which was around 150 people in October 2019 on an intentional land project in just down the coast here. That was, we called it the Terran Cospiracy. And we were trying to weave together the Bay Area systems change thinkers and all different sectors and create these guilds of collaboration across organizations. And it was a great start, and there was lots of learnings and challenges, and then COVID just completely destroyed all of our organizing efforts, and we haven't really gotten back to that. And HYLO also kind of came into our lives right after that as well, partly from that event. So there's, and it's been hard and sad to not be doing as much of the local organizing and community building, and seeing the community kind of disintegrate and now start to come back together in different ways and different forms. But totally with you on trying to recommon the world. And also our intention for HYLO is to create a tech commons and figure out what that means, or a public good is maybe another way to think about it.
Appreciate the question. Appreciate the questions you're raising. This is cool.
Likewise.
So thank you so much, Tibet, for showing up here. And we don't want to steal too much of your morning, as you are still doing things today for building this commons for all of us. So I want to echo Nancy and saying that this is very important work to help us build pieces of the infrastructure that can help us organize along all scales. And so thank you very much. And we're looking forward to maybe moving on to HYLO in the near future. Who knows?
Nice. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, really great conversation, and looking forward to weaving more with all of you.
Amen. Ciao.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.